Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a Responsible Tech Talk today at a special time on Thursday at 3. I am so glad that you all have made time to join us because this is truly a very special conversation I have been looking forward to, and I know you are going to really be glad that you joined. So joining me today is Kausar Riaz Ahmed. Kausar is a highly regarded pharma and AI executive and regulatory strategist whose work has contributed to really some of the largest and most influential government bodies and biopharmaceutical companies in the world. And what is really fascinating about Kausar's background is that she brings together this really deep scientific knowledge, also business acumen, given her MBA background. And she is really an advocate for responsible AI frameworks that are protecting both patients and innovation. So, as a PhD, she has just this deep expertise in the science side of things, bringing it together with the business, which is just such an important kind of reconciliation to and skill set to have in the environment that we are in today. So I really couldn't think of a more fitting person to talk about, things that might not be apparent on the surface as to how the regulatory and the biopharmaceutical worlds kind of come together. So this is going to be fascinating. Kausar, why don't you take over and share a little bit with the audience about your background to do it justice and just really all the nuance that you have on this topic.
Certainly. Thank you, Joel. It's been such a pleasure meeting you here today and discussing responsible innovation in AI in healthcare. I lead AI and generative AI initiatives within medical affairs and at Pfizer, which is a pharmaceutical company, of course. I've been with Pfizer for about 3 years. In my time here, I have developed and led AI strategy within medical affairs. I have led the development and implementation and scaling of our fast generative AI platform for medical content development. I've also been involved in internal and external engagement. That's been the broader focus of my role as well as leading research initiatives into how can we develop better AI tools, especially in the context of healthcare and in the context of medical affairs and clinical sciences. Um, Before coming to Pfizer, I was at the FDA for over 9 years. I came to FDA as a postdoctoral fellow, so right out of my PhD, came there, did a brief postdoctoral fellowship in computational modeling and how you could use modeling to predict any kind of cancer-causing effects from chemicals that are used across various products, medical devices, pharmaceutical intermediates, other types of chemicals used in consumer products, etc. So I started off as a postdoctoral fellow focused on that. And then I worked as a regulatory reviewer, reviewed over 150 new product submissions to FDA, and then transitioned into multiple roles across my 9 years there. But something that I'm really proud of is we had this grassroots kind of a working group that we formed that focused on modeling and simulation. And it was about how can we use innovation, how can we use innovative approaches, can we use in silico computational methods to inform regulatory science. And I think it was something that started off as a bunch of very talented colleagues interested in this space and coming together. And then we grew it out to over 200 experts across various centers within FDA. And we were able to do a lot of interesting things, do a lot of things that would inform, say, in silico clinical trials, that informed other types of product standards and FDA guidances, etc. So that was something that I've been very happy about. Like you said, I have a PhD background. I have a PhD in pharmacology, which is essentially understanding the how does a drug work. I worked on drug development, drug discovery for melanoma, so that's what I did. I During my time at the FDA, I got some point there. I realized that I loved doing what I was doing, but I also felt that I needed to build the muscle that focuses on, let's say, strategy or how do you business development, etc. I found myself being increasingly um, wanting to get into that space, and that's how I got my MBA, and shortly after I moved to Pfizer.
Wow. Kausar, thank you so much for sharing that, because I know a lot of folks who are in, broadly speaking, responsible tech are finding their way into that space. I think it's always just so informative to see role models who have, really taken many unique paths to get there. There isn't just one way. So I think that you kind of represent one of those paths. And I am really curious to know, you had said, I think somewhere on LinkedIn, I remember reading a post of yours, and you were expressing that you were a little maybe shy about the fact that you felt like a generalist, because as you said, your career has been so broad, covering so many domains, though rooted in healthcare, and you've reconciled with that as a positive. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about why that insecurity, and why now you think perhaps in the moment that we are in, it's actually a benefit.
And I think that's a very relevant question in the moment in time we are at right now. Um, because AI just lies at the intersection of so many different disciplines, right? The way AI is evolving right now. My story was when I was trained as a PhD student. Obviously, as a PhD candidate, you are expected to become the world expert in one small niche area. You know,
Mhm.
that is your goal. And that's what I did for about 5.5 to 6 years. And then I was doing my PhD, and there was a time during my PhD where I was able to find an internship opportunity at Eli Lilly, and I took a summer off. I did went there, and I was very fortunate in the sense I had really good mentors, and they had the project defined even before I came there. So I went there, and in the 3 months that I was there, it was hitting the ground running from day one. So I was able to do something, and I found, and that was about how can you use computational methods and modeling to predict toxicity or to predict cancer causing effects of chemicals that are either drug intermediates or other types of chemicals that are produced when you manufacture drugs, right? Active
Mhm.
pharmaceuticals, etc. So that was slightly different from my own PhD research, which was, like I said, in melanoma drug discovery, finding out, either understanding is this drug going to be a good candidate for melanoma treatment, or understanding why are patients developing resistance to a certain drug for melanoma.
Mhm.
So it was a slightly different tangential. And I did that. And then I came back to my university, which was MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. I came back there, wrapped up my PhD in the next 1 year. And then about 3 months or so later, I found an opportunity and a postdoctoral fellowship at FDA. And then like I said, again, this fellowship was in modeling. So I did that for about 8 months. And then I came on to, again, I think I've been very fortunate in finding great people, great mentors, colleagues, advisors. I was able to meet with my manager at the time. He had seen me speak at a meeting, at an internal meeting, and he was interested in what I was doing. I was able to find a job within FDA as a regulatory reviewer. So I got into the thick of regulatory science. I did that for over 5.5 years or so, 5 years, I think. And then this was right around COVID, and then my role shifted. Um, I was involved. I was involved in more focused on addressing shortages that were happening of medical devices during the COVID
Mhm.
pandemic. So being from a regulator who focused solely on new products, moving into addressing shortages, which was a lot about supply chain. Again, through all of this, there was a common theme, which was using data. How can we use data to understand where would shortages likely occur? How can we use data to understand, build dashboards that would allow us to visualize these kind of effects? So there was that common theme there, but I moved from a very scientific hardcore research background to modeling, computational modeling, to regulatory science, and then into supply chain kind of work,
Mhm.
obviously within the purview of FDA, and then coming down here again to AI and modeling. And because I was trained as a PhD, I think that I think it somehow becomes inbuilt in you. And I always felt like I had grown up watching all my professors becoming world experts in their own topic. So I kind
Mhm.
of felt like I was not doing it. I was going from one place to the other, and I kind of felt like I was becoming the jack of all trades.
Mhm.
And that has been a part of me because it has always worried me a little bit, because I would think I can't, if I have to stand my ground on something and talk really long and deep about a topic, would I be able to do it or not? That I think as is, we all experience to some level the imposter syndrome. And I think
Mhm.
my career trajectory, perhaps stimulated it a little bit more. But I think as I have come down to where I am today, I realize that in fact it was certainly a blessing in disguise. Um, my career has certainly been one pivot after another, and I think what it has taught me is standing right now, especially when we talk about AI, and I speak with multiple people across different backgrounds. I think we need more and more individuals who can translate between, say, data science and clinical science and regulation and being able to speak to the patients. So, someone who can understand data science, someone who can understand, in my field, health, right, data science, and then the clinical or the medical aspects of it, and then also speak the business aspects of it. And I think my career, to thankfully, to a large extent, has allowed me to have build experience in these spaces that allows me to work in these areas, perhaps be that translator. And I'm very thankful to it. And I think for a lot of people who are building their career right now, I think it's better. I would say breadth is the new depth.
Mm,
That's where
interesting.
Yes. So I think that's where we are going right now, especially if you're working in innovation and AI, because AI is a contact sport. We also know that AI and innovation is something which is not limited to, you can't afford to work in silos. You need to
Hmm.
be someone who can speak to multiple disciplines and work across multiple disciplines. So I think it is very important that we build that breadth. Obviously, you need to have your own niche area. I think that's a traditional, conventional wisdom, but I think in today's world, that breadth is very important.
Yeah, I would love to dig into that a little bit more because I happen to have a bit more exposure into the financial services, side of things. Also, a higher risk industry. Very similar conversations are happening in that space as well, particularly around, the siloization being a problem because these AI problem spaces are they're so much more complex and interdependent. I was just chatting with someone about, vendor risk management and how we think
Mhm.
about that. Well, it really requires that you know a bit about under the hood how these, models work and what questions to ask. And so it's demanding new things of, professionals who might have said, "Oh, that's really not in my wheelhouse." So I wonder, from your perspective, are there examples, or even if you've seen skill sets that really are in demand now, thinking about that cross-functional necessity in the medical space in particular, where how does that show up?
So, obviously, I think right now we don't need one more software developer. I think we have
Mm,
people with that skill set. We have a lot of people with that skill set, which is very important, critical, but I think that is not the most highly in demand skill set right now. But I think if you are someone in health or someone who is in medical, I used to think I needed to become someone who could program, who could code really well. I used to do
mhm,
coding about maybe 20 years ago, and then for a long stretch of my career, I didn't need to because I was doing other things. So as AI became more and more a part of my everyday work, I wanted to go back in there and build expertise. But what I have realized is you don't need to become an advanced coder, an advanced
mm,
programmer. You need to understand, you still need to be able to understand, if you were to, how the conceptually being able to understand the whole flow
mhm,
of the programmer code, if you end up being in that situation. But right now, if you're in the healthcare field, I would say being able to prompt your
mm,
LLMs well, because that's what a lot of us do. I was earlier this morning, I was trying to understand building Claude flow sessions. How can I build Claude flow sessions really well? So there's memory in there, so I can work on, say, my projects in a very consistent, in a cohesive manner. So I think understanding the platforms and tools that are available to us in this moment, like, say, you know. People use Notion for organizing everything.
mhm,
These are, I think, for people in other sectors, like, say, fintech, or somebody who's in the computing industry. I think these are given for them. But for someone in the health industry, these are not things that we use inherently.
mm.
I think using Notion for organizing all our work, I think it's not something that everybody does. But I think if you use these tools that allow you to save so much time, I think it's an efficiency builder for you. So I think being able to do that is important. I think rather than focusing on these specific tools, I think what I would suggest is trying to get as much exposure as you can so you can eliminate that fear of technology within
Hmm.
yourself, because I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with. Even if you don't end up becoming an advanced user, but develop intermediate level expertise across some of the just the most commonly available tools that you have, um, like say Claude, um,
Hmm.
other Gemini and other tools within these platforms. I mean, I use Canva and such every day because
Hmm.
I like building content, but that's just me. But if you are working in medical field, I would just say, developing the basics and understanding these tools conceptually is going to go a long way for you. Um, and also being willing to ask for help. I think in a
Hmm.
lot of companies, what we have is we have office hours, we have focus sessions where a lot of these vendors, but a lot of, say, AI champions and AI people who have digital focus jobs are helping people out to understand, to get on speed with these tools. So being able to do that, I think just doing that, I think puts you ahead of a lot of other people today.
Yeah, yeah. It's easy to forget just how early on we are in this particularly generative AI influenced ecosystem. It's just very early days. So your points about literacy make a lot of sense. I also noted that you, in particular, in general, I think you are very innovation forward. You're one who embraces technology. You were talking about people, getting over the fear. I don't sense a ton of fear in you. I think you are very forward looking. And I wonder, in the medical space in particular, what is it that you are, looking at and saying that this is really promising? This is, a really good example of where AI can make a powerful, positive difference.
I am. Thank you. You're being very kind. I do love innovation. I think if there's something that we can do to make our existing processes better or make our
Mhm.
work more effective, we should certainly pursue it. Um, in within the space that I'm working in, being able to, I think traditionally we have had medical science liaisons who would approach healthcare providers. So just for your listeners who don't have an healthcare background, medical science liaisons, typically from pharmaceutical companies, would typically reach out to various doctors, physicians, about various therapies that the pharma company might be developing, drugs, or sometimes even other therapies, gene therapies, etc. And then these physicians, if this particular therapy seems reasonable to them, they would prescribe them to their patients. So that has been the path. But the challenge has been finding the right physician to talk to, right? I
Mm.
mean, so for example, if you imagine a cancer therapy, um, finding the within the DMV area, the Washington D.C. metro area, finding the right physicians who are likely to have, say, for example, if you have a breast cancer drug, being able to identify the right physician to speak to, and in a language that resonates with them. So when I say language, I'm talking about, are these physicians, do they like long written content, like long reports format? Are they more social media savvy? What is the best way to interact with them? How do I develop my messaging? Um, so essentially, engagement with these positions, doing that in a better manner, doing that and optimizing it so we are able to reach the right patients faster. So
Hmm.
reaching the right patients with the right therapies as fast as we can, that is something that AI is having a lot of impact right now. And I think there's a lot of scope to grow as well. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities. Obviously, there's been the traditional things that we have done. So I'm talking about the Gen AI, pre LLM era, which is before 2023. And it goes down to today as well, where um, we are able to use AI to develop drugs faster. So just R&D, research and development,
Mhm.
right? We have shown that we can compress the timelines by 30 to 40% with AI. So I think that's a huge opportunity right there. In fact, last year we had the first fully AI discovered drug that came into phase 2 clinical trials, which I think is a huge
Mm.
milestone. And this
Mhm.
was a fully AI developed drug. It was from in silico medicine. It is for pulmonary fibrosis, essentially a lung. Um, lung-based medical condition. So we are at a point where we are able to bring these drugs to the market with AI, which has always been a traditional opportunity. It's just been expanded now. The scope has expanded so much now. So
Mm,
that's one place, but also the other place, which I mentioned earlier, is about being able to reach the right patients through engaging with the right HCPs in a language and in a medium of engagement that is resonating with them, that aligns with their behaviors and what they have been, um, what they prefer, right, based on their
mm.
preferences.
Yeah, it's a really interesting example because yes, obviously there are these efficiency gains. We were talking about tooling and how, we should expedite those things that aren't really good uses of our time. But here what you're expediting is really the connection with human beings to the right treatments and solutions for them and increasing their comfort level, which I think is an interesting outcome of being more efficient, right? We're able to serve people more directly and humanely. At least that's the way that I
Mhm.
interpret that. Yeah. I
Absolutely.
also wanted to kind of take that thread of the patient clinician sort of relationship, if you will, or at least reaching out to individuals who we are hoping to help, and kind of pivot to some work that you do, some thought leadership that you publish in your Health Innovation Insider publication, which folks can find, I believe, on LinkedIn, but also in
That's
Substack.
right.
Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. Both
Yeah.
on LinkedIn and Substack.
It's a wonderful publication. I just encourage everyone to read it and sign up because you have done a lot of your own analysis and thinking and just synthesis around the topic of trust and patient trust with respect to AI. It's really a fascinating and very rich area because we're in a moment of I would say, and I've heard you characterize it as, skepticism, right? In general, there's a little bit of weariness, though that's not universally the case as you've mapped out, the literature and found where there's traction in areas of high trust. But I wonder if you could spend some time kind of elaborating on this matrix of, where we are finding good kind of healthy fit and where AI is able to kind of flourish and people can achieve the benefits and where it's still maybe tepidly received or it's just not taking hold as we might hope.
Certainly. I think this is a very important area because the biggest factor that is preventing AI from having the impact that it could is trust, as we know. It's not the technology, it's not even the processes, it's being able to connect to your customer. The customer could be a patient, the customer could be a user, someone working in a pharma company or some other type of, say, a fintech company or a consumer product company, right? What I found was, so there was a publication that came out in January of this year. This is the largest trial that was done in the UK. It's called the Tricora clinical trial. What they did was they used an AI-enabled stethoscope, and they used it across multiple practices in the UK, and they used it to detect um, a to diagnose early diagnosis of heart attack, right? A person's potential for developing heart attack. That's what they were trying to diagnose early. And they
Mm,
found when they, in every single case where they were actually able to use this AI stethoscope, the diagnosis rate increased. So patients were able to get, there was a 3 time higher diagnosis rate. So early
mm,
diagnosis, which means it could have huge impacts down the road in saving patients, in allowing patients to have healthy lives longer.
mm,
But the uptake, but that was only when the stethoscope, AI enabled stethoscope was used. A
mm,
lot of times, the doctors were not able to use it on their patients.
mm,
The reason was they had a number of reasons. The my underlying theme that I found was trust. The second reason that they also had was that the use of this stethoscope for the doctors, in order for the doctors to use any kind of therapy or medical device, it needs to be integrated into their clinical workflow. They need to be able to document it in their electronic health records for patients, etc. So there was no mechanism, or there was limited mechanism for them to do it, to be able to
mm,
integrate the use of this AI enabled stethoscope in electronic health records for patients. So that was one of the biggest reasons they found. As I was reading through that article, I kind of felt like, This was a study that documented this in a very big manner, but we have all heard this. It analogically, we have all seen this every time on the ground. People, the technology is working, people just don't trust it. So I pulled about maybe 3 years of articles that I could find in a certain amount of time. And I also looked at various reports that had come from McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Bain and Company, and other consultancies. And I tried to find, I mapped patient proximity to patient on one end and trust on the other. And what I found was as the technology gets closer and closer to the patient, trust is low. So, for example, again, going back to this clinical trial, an AI stethoscope that can get to the patient, trust is much lower. Whereas at the same time, using AI for drug development, which is away from patients, it's far away from patients, it's
Mhm.
still in the lab, meaning you have the opportunity to reiterate things. If something goes wrong, you could always go back and fix them. So those type of AI technologies were having huge successes. Like I said, we were able to reduce 30 to 40% of time in drug development using AI. So that was my finding here.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I'm focused on now is if this is, but then here's the deal, like one exemption are these AI scribes. So doctors being able to capture doctors notes. So the question is, that has had 100% adoption.
Hmm.
So
Ah.
why is that? Right? It is still
Mhm.
closer. It may not be closer to the patient, but it's still closer to the health system. The physicians are using it in the hospital. So why are they able to report such successes? The
Mm.
reason being, it's transparent. So the doctors are able to see the notes that are being generated by this AI platform. It is transparent to them. There is human in the loop. And if there's something that doesn't seem right, the doctors have an immediate opportunity to fix it. So there's
Mm.
an opportunity, there's transparency, there's human in the loop. You can
Mm.
reiterate things and fix them. So that was, for me, the success of an AI scribe was somewhat of an eye opener because although it is not directly related to pharma, it is still within the health space, and it tells you the same principles apply across um, various aspects of your work in pharma or in health.
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
I think this is something to learn, to take from here. Trust gap is one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
Making sure that our workflows are built in a manner where there is transparency, where there is governance embedded in it. And that is going to help us build trust. And also, I think to come up with an attitude of experimentation.
Hmm.
Um, I think we have set such high bar with AI. If a human makes mistakes, how often do we make mistakes? At least 20 to 30% of the time we all make mistakes, and
Oh,
we
I
can
don't I don't know what you're talking about. I don't make that level of mistakes. I'm sure everything's perfect
I
all the
know.
time. No, very
Well,
true. Very true.
I wish, right? I mean, I would want to
Yeah.
be right 100% of the time, but we all end up making mistakes. So, but when AI does it, why do we give up on it so easily?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that's something to consider as well as we think about building trust. Um, instead of, saying this doesn't work, I'm going to pivot to something else. How about changing that attitude? Obviously we have to build
Mm.
the whole ecosystem around it, like ensure that these AI technologies are integrated across your workflows. Ensure that
Mm.
there is transparency, make sure that it's traceable, explainable. All of those things need to happen, but at the same time bringing this attitude of experimentation, willing to, we want to go bold, we want to go
Mhm.
fast. We also need to be okay with failing and
Mm.
relearning and trying these ideas out again.
Yeah, yeah. So I have so many questions just off of this commentary. It's very fascinating analysis that you conducted. I'm curious a little bit about the patient side of things. So it
Mhm.
seems to me that one of the trust building areas that you found lacking was with respect to clinicians and their ability to integrate it and document properly the
Mhm.
use and the outputs. But are you seeing that patients tend to be more receptive to AI being used in their kind of health care and treatment. I know that you've also written about sort of these big foundation model builders who are really actively pursuing that niche of, letting people kind of self-serve their health needs to varying degrees of, I don't know, success, or I'm not sure if it's really a good idea, but it's certainly something that they are pursuing. So I'm wondering if you have a read, on that side of things, on the patient side, as to what contributes to more and less trust with AI.
So, Jill, you probably know this. I believe there are over 240 million um, users who use ChatGPT for health purposes, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, yeah. So the AI augmented patient is already in the clinic. I
Hmm.
think patients are using it. Patients are using it for, like, say, during off hours, say in the middle of the night when they have health related questions. Patients are using GPT and other types of these tools when they are preparing for the conversations with the physicians. I use it and I find that I have, if nothing else, I would ask my questions and then I would say, is there something else that I should consider? Have
Hmm.
I left out something? So I think all of us use it for health purposes. Now, the question then becomes, if my physician uses AI, do I still hold him or her in that same high regard?
Oh,
Data on
interesting.
that is a little conflicting.
Hmm.
Um, there are a few things that I want to let me talk about what data shows right now.
Hmm.
We know AI tools, they are really good with memorizing or being able to capture vast amounts of information. So there have been studies where they have shown that an AI can do as well as a general practitioner when it comes to diagnosis, etc. But when it comes to very specialized, like when specialists, right, you have your gastroenterologist or a surgeon in a subspecialty and questions related to that, that is where AI doesn't do as well as your physician. Now, underlying question is, why is that? Why is AI able to do as good as a general practitioner, but not as a specialist, a super specialist? And what they found was AI has really strong memory. It doesn't forget anything. Unlike
Hmm.
us, where
Hmm.
I forget 10 things in an hour, AI doesn't. So
Hmm.
I think that's the advantage that it has. For physicians, I think that's a big deal because you could use this unlimited memory that AI, not unlimited, but vast amount of memory that AI has to, for example, if you have to do diagnosis of a rare disease, right?
Hmm.
Um, Perhaps the physician read about it 5 years ago and he has not had any case related to that particular rare disease in say 5 6 6 6 years, and then today he's seeing something, using AI to go back and look through information and being able to do the diagnosis faster, that's empowering. But I
Hmm.
think what data shows is when doctors are using AI, there's a general perception that they are not as good at their work as those that do not use AI. And I think it is a transitional phase. I think
Hmm.
all of us are going to be AI augmented. Um, at some point, we are AI influenced today. We are all AI augmented today, and we are going to get acceptance of it.
Hmm.
I think with patients, um, I guess we need more substantial studies that document how exactly patients consider doctors who depend on AI when they are doing the diagnosis, etc. But I think physicians are already doing it, and within the physician community, studies show that when doctors do it, it is not looked at very favorably. But
Hmm.
then I think that's something that would change over time because it's important to consider to leverage the best of what we have available, and you have a technology that is able to help you in not just doing things faster or doing things in not just increasing speed or reducing cost, but in essentially getting patients on the right therapies,
Hmm.
identifying health conditions in patients, which goes beyond quantifying in terms of dollar value. Correct.
Hmm.
So I think
Hmm.
we have to, I mean, if a physician were to go refer, say, an encyclopedia in order to do as he's working on a diagnosis, would you think less of him? I don't think we would.
Yeah.
It's
I've
the
had
same thing.
doctors have to do that actually from time to time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about innovation and trust. So, I hear you saying that transparency was one of these factors that
Mhm.
really, the more transparent a system is, the more trustworthy, generally speaking, is what you found. But we're also compelled to innovate and explore. And I'm wondering if you are seeing those things in tension, in that some of the more cutting edge tools are less explicable or less understandable. And does that kind of circumscribe our ability to innovate, or are there ways to kind of have best of both worlds? I'm just curious your experience on that.
So I think I would be speaking to the car if I said innovation is outpacing regulation. I think we all agree on that, right?
Mhm,
Um, so starting from there, I think with we have seen in the last 1 year, we have seen from any given company, technology provider, we have seen new models come out every 2 to 3 months. And
mhm.
that's just how it is.
Yeah.
In the last 3 months, we have seen open cloud. That's been such a huge revolution. There are so many people experimenting with it.
Yeah.
Um, do we understand all of it? Is it perfect? It's not going to be. So then the question becomes, how do we make, not essentially making peace, but what is a good middle point here, right? How do we balance innovation with all the other responsible components, as you said, about transparency, explainability, interoperability, etc. I think we need to have certain baseline guardrails, um, understanding the parent model that was built, um, that level of explainability and interoperability, um,
Hmm.
being able to use the same models across different environments, hardware environments, or being able to use the same data across, say, research and development through medical affairs and commercial side of the business, right?
Hmm.
So being able to, that level of transparency and openness needs to be there. But are we going to understand all of these models and be able to go back and understand the thinking and working of each of these models fully? I think that is an area where we would constantly play catch up.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that we give up on it. It means that we need to develop better systems um, that allow us to implement this, that allow us to understand these models as they evolve, not just in the first iteration or the first version, but as these models are working across different queries, or as these models work across multiple projects, being able to understand the logic behind why they did what they did, that is important too. And I
Mhm.
think, a lot of us are talking about, um, if because we if you depend so much on AI, does that mean a loss of the a loss in our own, say,
Mhm.
thinking capabilities or cognitive capabilities, etc. I think this is one way where we can keep ourselves relevant as well, because understanding why a model is doing what it did, understanding how, even like, say, for example, for example, if you run a prompt on Claude, and it explains, when you look at the thinking of why it came up with that particular answer, I think that helps us see what it is doing. It also allows us to catch errors faster, and
Mhm.
sometimes you see a trend as it is working through a particular, say, a project. So it
Mhm.
helps us to understand it. But I think, having said that, this is an area where we would constantly play catch up. Today, it looks like innovation is going so fast. With all the other metrics, which are very critical, we need to keep working on them, but I think we need to establish a baseline and say this level of transparency needs to be there, at least transparency in the data that these models are working off
Mhm.
of, right? That
Mhm.
needs to
Mhm.
be there. I'm a huge proponent of data quality and data
Mhm.
interoperability, because I don't know if everybody would agree, but I think data is the king. If you don't
Mhm.
have strong data, clean data, structured data, unstructured data, data in the format that it can be applied across different systems. If you can build that, half your job is done. That's been my experience. And you
Mhm.
need transparency at least at that level, as much transparency as you can as you're moving forward with the models too.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I think that I have seen where to simplify garbage in, garbage out, but I think that still holds true. It's also the area where I perceive people want to spend the least amount of time and effort, at least in general. Maybe it's not the same in healthcare, but it feels like, well, we have data, but that is an unhelpfully broad statement to make. So no, very interesting. I wanted to talk too a little bit about you have been on the regulatory side of things. You have been on the business side of things. You've really spanned so many aspects of the life cycle of bringing things to market. And I wonder how you think about drawing those lines. As you say, baseline guardrails and really looking out for public safety. These are some through lines in your work. And I almost believe that there's a proficiency that one needs to gain in calibrating where those lines need to be beyond maybe the base regulatory requirements and so forth. But you've been on the insides of these conversations and you've seen how these things play out. Where do you find folks are able to get to resolution? How do we make these judgment calls? What information is salient? Just curious your experience from the inside there.
So I think in the last 2 to 3 years, the FDA guidances that have come out, they do specifically point out that they need to be able to see the algorithms, be able to understand the algorithms. So explainability of these algorithms is something that regulatory agencies are looking for. And later this year, yeah, EU's AI Act is going to be in effect, which is essentially risk-based. So the high risk a device, an AI-enabled device, the more data, the more studies that you need to do with it, uh, the higher demands across all regulatory agencies. They are looking for safety and efficiency. So I think even as these agencies world over, when they discuss safety and innovation, safety and efficacy, what they're essentially saying is responsibility with what you're doing, but also being able to do good, also being able to
Mm,
do, also being able to innovate. So I think, you know, as of last year, 2025, we have had about 1,400 FDA authorized AI enabled devices on the market,
hmm.
which I think is a huge number.
Yeah.
And when there were a couple of studies that looked into these devices and the data that was submitted to the regulatory agencies with these applications, and they found that in a lot of these applications they had not done, they had provided perhaps minimum level of information that was required.
Hmm.
They had not all of these studies had done the clinical studies that were required, so those were not done. And after FDA had authorized these devices to be in the market, a lot of pharmacovigilance work, which is essentially understanding any kind of adverse effects or any kind of risks from these devices in patients when they're used in practice, a lot of that pharmacovigilance work also left much to be said. So having
Mhm.
said that, I think these are areas that need to be improved. I think when a regulatory agency is looking at it, they are looking at safety, um, meaning being able to use a risk-based framework for any type of device, including AI-enabled devices, as companies or sponsors are trying to get them into the market.
I'm curious to know, this is something that I contend with, and it may be very different in the healthcare space, but when it comes to risk tiers, there's the kind of the clear-cut no-go decisions, and the lower risk things, which are used with caution, but they're probably okay. Those feel more clear-cut in many cases. What gets a little more nuanced is the middle tier of risks, and at least in the spaces I'm working in with tech companies and so forth, there's a lot of nuance. And I think something that you said earlier made me think about just how important it is as we are moving forward quickly that we're continuing to, as I say, get our own sense of what acceptable and unacceptable risk is for those areas. And I just don't know if that resonates with you. Do you see these lines being very clear, or is there a lot of healthy debate along the lines here? Are they in fact blurry, and where do you see people perhaps overlook signals of risk that would help make those determinations a little bit easier. Does that question make sense? I have packed like 3 questions into one for you, Kausar.
But these are all very important considerations, right? I mean, what is an acceptable risk? I remember when we were going through the COVID pandemic, and we were looking at the effects of the adverse events, some of the adverse events that were getting reported in patients. I remember having a conversation with my friends where we were talking about, is this risk acceptable? And one of my friends, she said, in cancer, when we are doing risk assessment for cancer, if a particular, for a cancer drug, 1 in a million is an acceptable risk. So if 1 person in a million has an adverse effect, that is an acceptable risk. Now, what is the risk for an AI-enabled device or for an AI-enabled product that is used in diagnosis? If it's, again, I think that has not been clearly defined yet. In many cases, I think it will depend upon where is this particular AI-enabled device being used. Is this going to be used, say, for example, in cancer diagnosis? In that case, would we still have the risk level at 1 in a million, as opposed to, like, say, for example, an AI-enabled device that's used to diagnose heart attack, or an AI model that is being used in drug development? So I think one way to look at it is perhaps, what is the function of this particular, what is the intended use of this particular product? And then determine what the risk is. And I think that's where those 3 tiers, low, medium, and high risk, become very relevant. I think this is an area where there's a lot of there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And I think the lines are blurred here. I think we are talking about, think about intended use as you think about risk of this particular device. And I think that's where a lot of health authorities are going as well. But then defining what is acceptable level of risk with these devices or with these products, I don't think we have had clear directions there yet. And that is certainly an area which needs a lot of work. It is also an area which needs to be understood better.
Yeah, I'm so interested to see how that shows up on the healthcare side. And it sounds like an area of learning that as we are experimenting with the technology, we're also to some degree experimenting with our own governance as we go. So keeping those kind of in step here. I'm going to encourage folks, as we're kind of coming to the end of our time here, to put any questions that you might have in the comments, and we will keep an eye out for them and address them. But I did want to talk a bit about your perception of what responsible technology is. I ask all of my guests this because we're on Responsible Tech Talks, and I'm curious to know where you are in this moment around what it looks like to be someone who practices responsible technology. What does that mean to you?
Responsible technology, to me, I would always use the same metric, which is safety and efficacy. A responsible technology, especially because I work in healthcare, for me, is one that it has its impact, is able to have its effect. If it's a technology that supports a drug delivery, being able to deliver that therapy to the patient, so have its impact, but at the same time, do it in a safe manner, do it in a manner where it's not toxic to the patient. So I think a responsible technology for me is always going to be something that is innovation, that is within the guardrails of safety, and that is done all the things that we discussed earlier, which is innovation technology that can be transparent, technology that is trustworthy, but technology that also makes a difference for the patient, improves patient outcomes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have not heard the efficacy piece in there, because I suppose if that's not a component, then we are spending our resources in ways that aren't being helpful to people, and that is an example of irresponsibility, which I hadn't considered.
No, absolutely, and I think this becomes I think right before we started the session, we were talking about how different sectors look at risk very differently. I
Mhm.
think in the healthcare space, efficacy is something that's very critical because, say for example, if again, if you use an example of an AI device that is used for diagnosis, a failed diagnosis through this device could mean a person's death. So I think in those situations, it becomes very important that it's not just safe, but it's also effective. It is doing its job.
Mhm,
So I
mhm.
think that's an important consideration.
Yeah, and it also feeds into that trust life cycle, I assume. The more we can kind of bolster that, because we're basically adhering to the promises and the potential of what we say we're going to do, I think that might feed into it for the better.
Certainly, certainly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not seeing any questions coming in at this point. So I think in order to conclude, Kausar, I would love to have you share how people might be able to reach out to you, what folks you might like to connect with. If people have further questions, there is so much really to unpack about your work. And again, I encourage people to sign up for your newsletter. I'll make sure that that's in a link. But for those who might want to reach out to you, what is the best way?
Thank you, Joel. The best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. Um, I think I'm very fortunate in having a name that's not very common. It's difficult to pronounce, it's difficult to remember, but it's easy to find on Google.
It's a
Um,
good brand, is what I'm hearing.
Certainly, yes.
Yes, yes.
Um, the easiest way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. I'm also available on Substack. My email is kausar.riaz3@gmail.com. I would love to hear from anybody who is working in this area or anybody who wants to chat about these topics. And Jill, I really want to thank you for this discussion this afternoon. It was fantastic talking with you.
Oh, I feel very much the same. I'm very grateful for your time and honestly, your leadership in this space. It always makes me feel good to see the technologists and folks who are just driving the charge toward making technology work for human beings and be more trustworthy. And so that's very inspirational for me, and I'm sure a lot of other folks. So thank you so much.
It was indeed a huge pleasure. Thank you very much for your time, and it was really good talking to you.
Same. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.